Hello to all our viewers. This is one of our little capsule EJIL Live, and I have with me Professor Anne Orford from Melbourne. You're all familiar with her work, and she recently won a very distinguished fellowship from the Australian Research Council. But Anne, dealing with a very classical topic, intervention in civil war. The way I used to understand it, you're not allowed to intervene, either if there's a legitimate invitation or by way of counter-intervention. But I'm sure you have some new ideas, new approaches, fresh things to say about that. So maybe in a few minutes, tell us how you're going to tackle this problem.
Thanks, Joseph. So indeed, it is a very classical problem, both I think for international law and for international relations. So this question of whether and when it's lawful for external or foreign actors to intervene in a civil war is a problem that's really bedeviled international law and indeed has worried international relations scholars for a long time. And the difficulty of finding universal principles to address the problem is also very apparent. And I think if we compare responses to foreign interveners in Syria on the one hand and Ukraine on the other, whatever our politics, we will see that the principles we might apply to one, we feel not so comfortable with the other. So the problem for international lawyers of finding universal principles that can speak to this, I think, is a really pressing one at present. And I was really struck, as you say, there's a kind of familiar set of answers we might have to that as international lawyers that go back to Nicaragua, for instance. And we think, yes, we know that intervening in a civil war has this set of normative principles surrounding it. But I was very struck over the debates around Syria, a lot of attention on the Security Council and debates that were going on there, much less attention being paid by lawyers and others to the question of support for rebels outside the Security Council. So, you know, what the New York Times was calling non-lethal support for rebels, well, still that would have fallen in the Nicaragua case back in the day. Nicaragua itself, I think, was the end point of a process post the decolonisation moment where states were trying to push for a full legal articulation of what non-intervention would mean, particularly in Latin America, where the US administration had been using a policy of proxy wars to kind of control that region, as had the USSR. So I think Nicaragua was a high point for a particular attempt to articulate what non-intervention would mean. And it seems to me that today this is no longer really grasps the situation. So we have a classical problem of an international law that's trying to meet social transformation and struggling to really deal with that. James Crawford, in his general course last year, pointed out that international law is largely, or in many ways, a customary system. And I think one of the areas of international law where we see that most clearly is use of force. So although we have a charter, a lot of the debates are around whether and how that those rules are transformed by custom. So it's...
So you know that EJIL is almost an open access journal because after 1 year, our entire archive is open access. And I was looking at the statistics, and two of the most downloaded articles, tens of thousands of times, was the debate between Nino Cassese and Bruno Sima on intervention at the time in Kosovo.
Yes.
And the way it worked out is that Nino was saying, it's a new world, the humanitarian considerations, we have to rewrite the rules, and whereas Bruno was saying no, if I remember correctly, we should still treat it as illegal, but sometimes you drive through a red light, even though you're not allowed to drive through a red light, and that would, I suppose you're closer to the Nino approach.
So interestingly, I was one of the people who've downloaded these articles recently because I was looking particularly at Bruno's piece, and what I find hugely helpful about the way he comes at that is he's partly going back to think about NATO, really. So to think about, and here is an example of what one of the things I'd like this project to do. So he's asking, what is a regional organisation under the Charter, and how is NATO governed by the Charter rules? And he's treating these as normatively full questions. So the question of regionalism and what is a region and what is a regional organisation, he's saying we have to treat these as juridically important questions. So it's not just...
Because we're always sort of more suspicious of a unilateral intervention by one single state with the usual suspects.
Exactly.
And find it more legitimate if there was a collective decision-making process with the kind of checks and balances that entails.
Exactly.
That's part of the thinking, isn't it?
Right. And so what I find very interesting about Bruno's response, and I've been using it a lot because I've just written a piece for the Yale series on its commentary series on the North Atlantic Treaty. And it's being edited by Ian Shapiro and Adam Tooze, and I was asked to write on NATO and responsibility to protect. So Anne-Marie Slaughter has recently written a small piece called A Regional Responsibility to Protect, saying NATO as a regional organisation, so there I would have a question already, could play the role that we used to expect of an international organisation. It could take collectively decisions to act, and then we can just avoid Chapter 8 of the Charter or rewrite it. So we could say, well, regional organisations can act without Security Council authorisation.
That's unorthodox, right?
It's unorthodox. So it's like a humanitarian intervention argument, but just with the regional rather than the unilateral. And for me, what that's missing is the concept of regionalism. What is it to be a region? And it's not just geographic, it's geopolitical. So why would NATO be a regional organisation in the sense of having the authority and the legitimacy to protect people in North Africa? So immediately we're asking a whole different set of questions. And in fact, so what Bruno reminds us is that NATO's never understood itself to be a regional organisation. It's always argued it's a self-defence organisation under Article 51. And there we see, a really different story. So there it's overtly to secure the North Atlantic area, including, as it now says in its strategic concept, the energy security of the North Atlantic area.
One might think that some countries, perhaps Russia, others would say, what gives NATO the legitimacy to decide, etc. When do you plan to come out with the first results of this fellowship?
So I only was awarded it yesterday, but I've given a series of talks on it already.
So what can we tell the readers of EJIL and the viewers of EJIL Life? Where might they go and to begin to track your thinking on this?
So very soon we will start to have a public face for the program. So it's not just a fellowship, but it's a program. So I also will have the capacity now to put together a team. So a series of postdoctoral fellows and a series of PhD students, and we will start to build a profile.
All of us, let's watch out for that. Because interesting stuff is going to come out. Just before we end, Anne, just a minute or two. You mentioned to me previously that there was something special about this fellowship because it was designed to encourage women in research. Do you want to say a word about that? I find that exciting.
So the Australian Research Council awards 15 of these fellowships across the country every year, and it's across fields other than medical science. So, and they've had problems in the past with not many women being appointed to these fellowships. So a scheme they developed a number of years ago was that out of the 15 they award, there'll be 2 additional fellowships that are designed to promote women in research. So they're both awarded, one in the social sciences and one in the sciences, to a senior woman. And part of this particular fellowship is that you have a role as an ambassador for promoting women in research, and also that you commit to undertaking mentorship and leadership for junior women, either as early career researchers or doctoral students. So,
but let's hope that it's not just then a fig leaf to go on with the normal one not being awarded to women.
No, that's right. So this year I was really pleased to see that out of the 15, I think there were 4 awarded to women. So 26% were awarded to women, and there were 22% of women applied, so a slightly better ratio. So the problem they keep telling us is that women don't apply for these. So I think one of the functions of the, so I'm the Kathleen Fitzpatrick Laureate Fellow, which means that I'm the Social Sciences Ambassador for Women this year. And so then as part of the project, we get extra funding to hold early career workshops for young female researchers to bring them to Melbourne. And I also have a visiting postdoctoral and a visiting doctoral fellowship every year for 1 to 2 months for our outstanding female scholars from around the globe to come and work with the program. So they can come in, we fully fund them, and they are integrated into the program, into the workshops, the working papers. So it's very much an interdisciplinary project, and so then we'll be inviting scholars in the fields of history, international relations and international law.
No better person to act as Ambassador for Women in Research, Anne Orford. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joseph.